In today's video, we're looking at the FCE Speaking Exam Part 2. We'll look at what you have to do in the FCE Speaking Part 2, some common mistakes people make when they take the exam, some useful language that you can use in the FCE Speaking Part 2, and finally, we'll have a real exam task that you can practice answering so that you're prepared for the exam. So, before we start, I want you to take a minute or two and write down everything you know about the FCE Speaking Part 2. Think about how long you should speak for, if you speak alone or if you speak with a partner, and if your examiner gives you anything. You can pause the video now to write down what you know. Now we'll go through a description of the Part 2 speaking exam and then the procedure of what happens in the exam. So what happens in Part 2? Well, you're given a question and two pictures to compare and give your opinion on. Only one person speaks at a time and you speak to the examiner. You do not have to interact with each other. You have about 2 minutes to talk for, and then after you finish speaking, the examiner will ask a follow-up question to your exam partner, and that should take about 30 seconds to answer. So here's an example procedure. We'll call the examiner the interlocutor because this is the person who's speaking with you. And they'll show you the pictures and set the question for the first student, student A. Student A should then describe and compare the two photos. And then student A should answer the question and speculate about it. The interlocutor then sets a follow-up question for the other student, student B. They should answer for about 30 seconds. Then the whole process repeats, but the roles are reversed. So the interlocutor gives two new pictures and sets a new question for student B. And they compare and describe the pictures, then answer the question, and student A answers the follow-up question. So that's the procedure that we're going through. Now, there are two common mistakes that people make during the FCE Part 2. We're not going to talk about grammar or vocabulary mistakes here, but mistakes with the exam task. So the first one that people often do is they only describe the photos and they do not compare them. They talk about one photo at a time and they don't get on to comparing, saying what's the same, saying what's different. So it's important to highlight similarities and differences. The second mistake that people make is they don't actually answer the question that was set along with the photos. And that's the important part. Describing the photos, comparing the photos, this is only part of the task. It's to help you with the answering the question. The question is what you need to answer. The photos are the prompts to answer it. So now we're going to look at some useful language and phrases that can help you out and help you avoid making these mistakes. So I want you to think, before I give you some examples, of some language that can help you to do these things. So to go through it. So I've given an example here. You need some language to describe photos. And I've got an example one here. In the first photo, there is. So pause the video. Think of some things that you need to do in the exam task and some language that will help you. If you can't describe what this language is for, then just write down some useful phrases and maybe we'll categorize it later on. Or if you can only think of the things you need to do, for example, describe photos, then you can just write that heading down. Pause the video now, and in a second, I'll give you some examples. So here is my list of useful language. I have divided it into two groups. The first is describing photos, and the second is speculating and giving your opinion. So within describing photos, we've got talking about one photo, which was the example we had before in the first photo. Then we also have describing things which are the same and describing things which are different. For speculating and giving your opinion, you need to make speculations, give your opinion about it. They're very similar, so don't worry about that too much. If you didn't write down phrases before, this is your chance now to write down the phrases for each of these functions that you can think of. If you have written down phrases already, you can match them to the different categories. So again, pause the video, think of the language that you already know. This is a great way to revise as well. If you've watched this video before, you can use this point to write down the phrases that you remember from before. So let's start looking at phrases for talking about one photo. It's probably the easiest one that we have here. So a common phrase you could use is the top picture shows. Usually your pictures will be divided in top and bottom. So this is a great way to identify one photo and talk about what is in the photo, what you can see. But you can also use it to talk about an event or something, so a celebration, a party. The top picture shows people having a party, people having a good time. It doesn't have to literally be exactly what you see, like there are people in a room. Next one, of course, bottom picture, referring to the bottom picture. In one photo, there is. So this is another phrase. Obviously you can use there is, there are, because you are talking about what is in the photo there. You're identifying things. You can point to demonstrate which photo it is. This is also a good setup for showing contrast, because you can then follow it up with, in the other photo, there is or there are. A final useful phrase, a bit more interesting language, is in the picture above, picture below, it looks as if. So this is as if and it looks like are phrases where we can speculate a bit more about what's going on. We don't have to just describe what we can see, but we can give our opinion, make predictions, guesses about it. So those are some useful phrases to talk about one photo. Obviously, we use them in combination. We can talk about both photos. Now let's talk about similarities between photos. So the first phrase that we have here is, we can use show, and we can use there is and there are. So for example, both pictures show. This is a good phrase just to say that there is something in both of these pictures, or there is a common theme between them. And also, in both pictures there are. Now, it's important to say, we can't say in both pictures show, or both pictures there are. We need to have these phrases together. Remember the preposition or lack of it. We can change it a bit again. There are, there is, in both photographs. But let's move on to two slightly more complex phrases. So for example, they're both quite similar because they both show. So this is a way you can talk about similarities between two photos. It's a bit more complex phrase, but it's still saying that both pictures show. In one respect, the pictures are quite similar because. Now we can adapt this phrase a bit. We can change one to a couple. So in a couple of respects, the pictures are quite similar because, and then we can give a couple of details, things which are similar between them, or in many ways, the pictures are quite similar because, and we can give more details, which are. So hopefully you can see we can change these phrases like they're both quite similar, they're both very similar, but it's useful to remember these phrases still. So now let's move on to talking about differences. So there are many phrases for this. The most simple is we can use but to show contrast. So in the first picture, we describe what's in the picture. There is something or other. But in the second picture, and we say what's different. So if one picture had a blue car and the other picture has a red car, in the first picture there is a blue car, but in the second picture there is a red car. This one takes a bit longer to describe because we have to describe what's in them. So this second phrase is a bit shorter. This one, or this photo, looks more than the other. Or in this picture, it looks more. So we can use this for a much shorter phrase. If we need to save time, highlight the difference. It looks more interesting. It looks more fun than the other. Using a short adjective there. We can also use a slightly more complex and longer phrase. One difference between the pictures is, and then we have our clause there. So the first picture shows a party, the second picture shows or something like this. And finally, if there's a really big difference between them, we could say the biggest difference between them is that this one, give a description, but the other one, and give a different description. So this again is a way that we show the biggest difference. Obviously, again, you could adapt the phrase a small difference between them or a significant difference between them to use more interesting language. Now, remember I said that giving an opinion and speculating, this is very important to do. Don't just describe the photos. So these phrases are really important to remember. Now, the easiest option to give your opinion is to just start with I think and then state what you think. But you could also use in my opinion, which again is very basic and very simple, and I'm sure you know already. So for more complex phrases, you could say, I'd say that. So for example, I'd say that the people are having a better time in the first photo. Or it seems to me, and then you can continue your clause there. And again, a final option, my view is that, and you can give your opinion there. Now, I know we've gone through a lot of different phrases. You don't need to know all of these phrases. Instead, I would suggest that you identify an easy phrase for you to use, one that you know already that you can be prepared to use. And then also try and pick one or two of the more difficult phrases and learn to use them correctly as well. That way, you'll have a range of phrases. You'll also have some more complex phrases to use in your back pocket. So obviously, we need to practice. So in a second, I'm going to give you two photos from a Cambridge practice paper and the question that goes along with them. You can find these pictures and the practice papers on the Cambridge University website in the section for the FCE exam. I'll set you the task, show you the pictures, and then you can pause the video and do the exam task. It's up to you how you want to do this. You could set a timer for 2 minutes and have a go at doing the task. Or you could record yourself for 2 minutes and then you can analyse how well you do afterwards, perhaps show it to your teacher. A final option for you to practice is to write down a script, a model answer of your answer for this task. Afterwards, I will answer the task and give you a model answer that perhaps you can see how I would answer it. So I'll set the task, have a gap, pause the video, and then there will be a model answer. How important is it to help people in these situations? Pause the video now and give your model answer. So I have just set a 2-minute timer and I will start my timer now. In both pictures, we can see people helping other people, but they are in very different situations. In the first picture on the left, we see a physio helping a football player. It looks like he's been injured while playing football. In the second picture, we see someone, perhaps they are a tourist, and a police officer helping them. I think the tourist has got lost and the police officer is helping her find her way. In the first situation, it is very important to help the player. It's something he can't do on his own because he's been injured. If the injury isn't treated, if he doesn't get help, then he may have some health problems in the future. He could be in a lot of pain as well. In the second situation, it is also important to help the tourist because tourists can be victims of crime, and the police and so if they don't get help, they don't find their place, they may find themselves in a bad situation. They may have something bad happen to them. However, perhaps the tourist could use their phone, or perhaps they would discover something if they aren't helped by the police officer. And so I think that it's more important to help the person in the first situation than the second. But both situations, people should help the other person in that situation. And my timer has stopped, so that is 2 minutes that I spoke for. Was it a perfect answer? Perhaps not. Perhaps I could have given more details. I could have described the pictures a bit more. Perhaps I shouldn't have given a preference. I should have just said that both were worth helping people. But would it be a good exam answer? I think so. I would love to thank you for watching this video. If you have any more questions, please leave your comments below and I will try and help you.